So here's the question, ladies and gentlemen. What was the most important hockey game in the Eastern Conference of the 1980s? Well, if you think back, if you're a Carolina Hurricanes fan, you have to give notice of this. If Hartford would have won Game 7 in Montreal with Mike Louis in net, if Claude Lemieux wouldn't have scored in overtime one of the biggest goals in Montreal history, maybe the Hartford Whalers would be still around. The loss by Mike Louis, who choked in the 81 Canada Cup, coming over from St. Louis, he did his best, but he was outmatched by Montreal's defensive side. So we're going to be looking at that divisional series where there wasn't many goals scored. There was only technically 4 goals in the last 2 games. Now, the series, it was the second playoff series between these two teams. First time we played was in a prelim round, or round of 16, in 1980 when Gordie Howe, Bobby Hull, Andre Lacroix lost in 3 straight games to Montreal. And of course, Pat Boutet injured Lafleur in Game 3. Lambert scored in overtime, but Montreal lost to Minnesota the next session. Now, the upstart Whalers, who had a good general team, came to play. Now, they won the first game in Montreal were Stu Gavin, Sylvain Turgeon, a future Montreal Canadian, and John Anderson scored key goals in the second period to lead 3-0. Nyland made it 3-1 at 10:42 of the third, but Stu Gavin, an empty net, the second of the contests, did it. So Patrick Roy only saved 19 of 22. Now, Game 2 was all about Guy Carbonneau. Now, Montreal got a power play goal at 12:33 the first from Stéphane Guichet, but Carbonneau made the big difference. He scored at 17:04 the first period and 6:12 of the second period. He's second in the postseason. Ray Ferraro, before he became an announcer, scored at 7:17 of the second, and Montreal eventually held on for a 3-1 victory. Now, Montreal didn't really play good in Hartford during the regular season. I think their goal song got to them, na 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 na. Of all people, in Game 3, Shel Darlene, who I think had one of the better rookie seasons for a Hab, scored his first in the postseason at 4:48, and the underrated Stéphane Richer made it 2-0 on the power play at 18:43. Now, here it got freaky. 3-0 for Montreal, and Claude Lemieux's fourth in the postseason at 4:09, with Dave Tippett making it 3-1. Montreal held the rest of the way with Guy Carbonneau scoring in an empty net at 18:38. Now, Steve Weeks started for Hartford but gave up 2 goals on the 15 shots, with Mike Louis later taking over. Now, Patrick Roy stopped 20 of 21. Now, it looked like Montreal was going to win in 5 games because a lot of people felt that Montreal was overmatched the team. Now, Stu Gavin, the unheralded player of the series, scored at 13:53 to give Hartford a 1-0 lead, and he held that until the third period, when at 12:22, Mats Naslund scored a tying counter. But in the first overtime, in the old words of Harry Neal, you got to score early in overtime to win, Kevin Dineen scored his third in the postseason to win it. Now, I don't think Hartford had any faith with Michael Wheat. Steve Weeks had a great game, stopping 18 and 19. Now, here it gets pretty freaky. April 25th, I saw this game at JR's bar in Woodstock, New Brunswick. And Claude Lemieux, Guy Carbonneau shorthanded, and Mats Naslund gave Montreal an early 3-0 lead. They had a hard time scoring in that round, but they had 3 goals. Kevin Dineen made it 3-1 at 15:46. In the second period, Dineen, the second of the contest, it was 3-2. But of all people, Mike Lawler scored at 16:03 to put Montreal ahead for good. John Anderson, coming over from Toronto, scored at 9:58. He's 5th in the postseason. Then Guy Carbonneau, his 5th of the series, made it good. Now we're thinking, hey, Game 6, maybe Montreal, like Steve Weeks again, gave up 5 goals. We're thinking, hey, Montreal's going to wrap it up in Game 6. However, that old bugaboo, Kevin Dineen, with his 6th of the postseason at 7:30, he held on to right the rest of the way. Hartford didn't have much of an offense in the game. Patrick only stopped 16 of 17, but Mike Louis saved 32 of 32. So Game 7, probably one of the biggest games in Montreal Canadiens history, came down to this. It was getting to be a habit where Montreal take an early lead, hold on to the third period, and either win an empty net or force overtime. Mike McPhee on shorthanded 1847, one of the biggest goals of his career, besides the setup with Skrugland on the assists in the Calgary Game 2 in the finals. No scoring in the second period, but of all people, Dave Babich, Wayne's brother, not known for scoring big goals at 17-12. Now, in the first overtime period, the grinder line was on. Claude Lemieux was whacked behind the net. No penalty was called. He was whacked twice. And Mike Lewitt misjudged him coming around, and a backhand that's still considered one of the biggest games of all time. Now, Bob Cole did not announce this game for CBC. It was Dick Irvin, who's one of his biggest calls. And I think on the Sportsnet America or ESPN, the American announcer couldn't believe it. But in the French announcers, "Oh, le but!" And that was one of the biggest calls in Montreal Canadiens TV history. Patrick stopped 24 of 25 for the victory, while Louis stopped 30 of 32. There was some question if Weeks should have started Game 7 because Louis allegedly had some kind of injury. So what was the ramifications of the Hartford Whalers losing this game? Well, let's look at Carolina Hurricanes history, because they took over Hartford. Now the Hurricanes, again, Stanley Cup winners a couple of years ago. Very, very strong team in Carolina. Now, let's go under Wikipedia and see what happened after '86, and I think it's very important. Now, by the mid-1990s, late 1990s, there was no more Hartford Whalers. So just to see how the downward trend was to the Whalers after the loss. Now, there was some question of Hartford would be a Stanley Cup contender in the '87. Now, after their second season, they were the New England Whalers, but they had moved to Hartford, and became the New England Whalers. The team itself, again, they call them the Whale. They had a great fan base, Okay. The seasons in the NHL were quite strong. The uniforms were well put together, and let's look at the Hartford Whalers season and play the Hartford Whalers victory song. Now, they won the Avco Cup in '73 and continued that success. They made the Avco Cup finals in '78, but did well. They were a number 3 team in the league. Now, in the NHL, if you look at the rough numbers, okay, they lost in the quarterfinals 4-3 to the Canadiens. '87, knocked out in the first round. '88, knocked out in the first round. '89, '90, '91, '92, knocked out. And their last 5 seasons in the NHL, they didn't make the playoffs. And they were low under 500. The last winning season they had was in 1990, where they lost to the Bruins. And the big devastating loss, they had a good team in '89. Montreal went straight to the finals that year, but they lost 4-0 to Montreal. So, and again, they lost '88 again to Montreal, and Quebec knocked them off in '87. So if Montreal and Quebec weren't in that division, it might be still a Hartford team. So if you have a chance, you can see the highlights of Dick Irvin's call, but I think it's the American network that's showing that Hartford-Montreal game, and it's probably, again, one of the biggest overtime goals in all of Canadian NHL history. So that's the story of the Hartford Whalers and Montreal Canadiens meeting up in the '86 NHL quarterfinals. If you like what you're doing here, we're a Sports File podcast. Let us know what to like, comment, subscribe, or share.